Growing up, my brother always used to tell me the story about how I was born into another family and they didn't like me, and so they dropped me off at our house that we grew up in on the front doorstep. And our mom and dad took me in reluctantly and raised me as their own child. And that story used to make me feel so sad and devastated me. And I believed it to quite an extent because I did feel really different. I felt like I didn't fit into that family. And then once I got older, I appreciated that story and I really wanted to believe that story because, well, there are no truer words than you can choose your friends but not your family. And I certainly wouldn't have chosen my family. But it's what I got. I'm Nikki Lynn Chase, and this is my podcast, Adult Chicken, and it's about my journey, my stories, and my adventures about navigating life's unexpected and raising two special needs kids as a single parent. So, my brother and I grew up with the parents that kind of looked the part of the perfect family. And my mom, she didn't really come completely unhinged until, the later junior high school days. Now, my dad, though, was the exception because he didn't care about playing the role of I'm a perfect person. And of course, we didn't have social media, so there was no portraying your life as perfect throughout social media. But what I always respected about my dad, and he's still alive, he's 83, is that he was just unapologetically an asshole. And he did not genuinely care, still doesn't care what anyone thinks. And it was a weird thing to grow up with because everybody knew him as the town asshole, and everybody who knew him either feared him or hated him. And it was my dad, and it was a weird dynamic. I remember talking specifically to a boy who had gone to another school. And I was so excited because I'm like, this guy's not going to know anything about my family. He's not going to know who I am. He won't know anything, from my elementary school days or junior high school days. And he asked me, I think he started figuring out who I was. He goes, "Are you Bob's daughter?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah, that's my dad." That guy turned around so fast and never talked to me again. That was my dad. My dad ran a tennis facility and my dad had a temper. And I remember he was in a tennis tournament at one point and he was in the finals and he didn't agree with the guy's call, and he hopped over the net and just punched the guy out, and that carried forward to my parents got divorced and my dad moved to the mountains and his reputation proceeded to follow and he became the town asshole of Vail, Colorado. And I had quite a bit of respect for my dad just because he was unapologetically who he was. And I was probably one of the few people that wasn't terrified of my dad. And I think there was a mutual respect there for that reason. And once I was in college, I started really utilizing the fact that he was in the mountains and a ski instructor because I would get a free pass. And so that way I would schedule my classes so that I'd spend half the week in the mountains snowboarding, which I loved. And he had a mom. He didn't have any siblings, and his dad had passed away when he was little, a kid, and he had a mom, and that was Granny. And my brother and I grew up with two grandmothers, my mom's and my dad's, and we always liked Granny because come to find out she was really dumb, like really, really dumb. But we liked her because you could get away with anything. And she believed anything you told her. And we could just do whatever we wanted when we were with Granny. And she was this little teeny tiny thing, about 4'11" maybe, with shoes on. Didn't never topped the scales at probably more than 90 pounds. She was just this tiny thing. And she'd sit and smoke inside her apartment. She'd smoke like 2 packs of cigarettes a day, and she was tough, but we just knew her as sweet little Granny who would give us whatever we wanted and you could get away with anything. Well, she was still alive when my dad was living in the mountains, and they didn't have any sort of relationship at all. My dad would check in, but there was this little she tugged at my heartstrings, little sweet granny. So I remember my dad asking me to go down and check on her because she had ended up having to move from her apartment to live with somebody, a caregiver, because Granny was a hypochondriac and Granny would get into the Tylenol, and she was so tiny that Tylenol would do the trick. I mean, she they kept finding her kind of blacked out, and she loved medicine. And so I went down to check in on her with her new living arrangement, and I didn't like what I saw. I'm like, Dad, this lady's writing checks out of her bank account. This is not a good situation. She's telling me these horrible stories. This lady sounds like she's super abusive, and I don't, you can't leave her there. She's got to move out. I'm like, Dad, I listen. It was my senior year. I said, Dad, we've got an open room in the place in Boulder. Granny can come live with me, and she has to buy her own food. And my dad was like, okay, let's do it. Well, I had no idea what I was signing myself up for. I didn't know what it was like to take care of a geriatric person. And I didn't know what Granny was really like. So I'm thinking I've got this sweet, nice Granny, and she's going to go to college with me. She's going to live in Boulder, and she's going to be my roommate, and this is going to be great. Generations of this family in one house under, under the same roof in Boulder, Colorado. So the first little bit was awesome. She was kind of like having a project, and she was legally blind, and she didn't mind if I cut her hair, and because she didn't know what it looked like, and I loved it. It was kind of endearing and sweet and awesome. And I remember she wanted a perm, and so we gave her a home perm, but we couldn't find any Vaseline. You'd have to stick the cotton, so we're using petroleum jelly. She's none the wiser. She's just like, okay. And then I knew she had this problem with overdosing on Tylenol, and she would really get after the laxatives. So I would meticulously take out the white good and plenties and put them in a Tylenol bottle and just kind of go to town, Granny. Take as many as you want. You're going to be okay. And then I'd put chocolate bars in laxative boxes and X-Lax boxes, I think, and go to town. She had her own little fridge, and everything was great. And then she started showing her true colors, and Granny, being this teeny tiny 4'11", weighed probably 80 pounds, 85 pounds wet, she was mean. She was really mean, and she was angry, and she hated everything. And boy, she'd come at me with hangers, and she would beat me with hangers. Now, it wasn't too terrifying. Again, she was so teeny tiny, I could kind of put my hand on her head to keep her at bay, but she was evil. And once I had her, I started to figure out I wasn't going to get rid of her. Like, who was going to take this woman? I didn't know what you did with older people. I didn't really know anything about old people's homes, or assisted living homes or situations. And I realized once I got her, my dad was like, okay, not my problem anymore. So here I am with Granny. And then I graduate from school. It was still, we made do with what we had. And old Granny, I'd dress her up and put her in snowsuits, and we'd ride around in the Jeep. I had a Jeep at the time. And she was just one of the college kids, but she was a mean old college kid, and ended up going to Southern California and moving with Granny. Well, she just got meaner as the years went on living with her. I lived with her for 3 years. She just got meaner and meaner, and we got to Southern California, and again, she loved her medicine. And there was a time we had met up with my brother for Thanksgiving, and she didn't drink alcohol, but if and when she did, it was really fun because she would share all the family secrets. And I'd start figuring out different things about my dad and learning things about my dad that I know he never wanted me to know, but it made so much more sense. It allowed me to really understand, God, how could you have even turned out somewhat decent if that's your mom? Like, again, in hindsight, I didn't realize what my mom was turning out like either, what I'd learned from my experiences. But this lady, Granny, was crazy, and she was mean. So we get to Southern California and we're at Thanksgiving, and she gets into my brother's Jägermeister because it tastes like cough medicine, and she loved cough medicine, and she just gets hammered and completely just throws the whole family under the bus and gives away all the secrets. And that was entertaining and crazy. And there was another, she'd smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day for eternity. And then one day just had quit in her 70s. But we had a friend come over. Of course, we're advancing our substances. And he had a blunt. And he got Granny to smoke a blunt with him. And that was pretty fun. So between the Jägermeister and the blunts, it was still kind of fun to hang out with her. She was very hard to deal with. She never wanted to do any. If she didn't want to do it, she was not going to do it. And though she was tiny, she was mighty, and she hated taking baths or showers. And I would tell her, you need to take a bath or shower, and she would refuse. And she would sit in the house and yell, help me, help me. And all our windows would be open. We're in Southern California with no air conditioning. And I'd say, you can't sit inside the house and scream, help me. Like, if you genuinely need help, you need to go out of the house and ask somebody. But you can't do that. It's terrible. And the only way I could calm her down, remember, she was dumb and she was blind, was I would dress up like, I would just put a wig on. I say legally blind. She could see things, but I'd put a wig on. I'd put high heels on. I'd use a different voice. There was a way to call on a landline, so I would call ahead of time, and she'd think it was I called myself senior social services, and I would come knock on the door. She'd answer it, and then we'd have a sit down, and I'd have to counsel her into taking showers and baths. When she'd get really mad, she'd insist on me getting her suitcases. And then I'd get her suitcases and kind of look at her like, now what? And she'd put a couple items in there. And it was always a charade. She was never going anywhere. She had nowhere to go. I had nowhere to take her. But I'd put her in the car and I'd take her to Home Depot, and she'd think she was at the airport. And then she'd kind of change her mind and wouldn't want to go anywhere. And I obviously wasn't taking her anywhere. And that was life with Granny. And I didn't realize what I had signed up for. And that was, I had a hell of a time getting rid of Granny. So I ended up back in Colorado with Granny. And finally, when I moved to New York, I had figured out what to do and got her in an assisted living back in Colorado. But it was that experience that really, really helped me get to the bottom of understanding my dad's sort of absence in my childhood, and why he was such a bitter, angry person. My God, 3 years with that woman, and holy shit, I understood, or at least understood a lot better at that point. So my dad did not care for people, never did. He definitely didn't like children. So when I had kids, I didn't have the expectation. No, that's wrong. That's a lie. He and I's relationship, he had softened up, I thought, for me. And I think when I figured when I had kids, he would really, maybe, he always hated people. He hated kids. But I swore that if it were mine, that would change. Like, he would definitely, how can a grandpa not like his own grandchildren? Well, so I have kids, and I have the first one, and it doesn't change. He does not like it. It's so awkward and uncomfortable, and him around my kid was just weird. He just didn't know what to do. He cannot relate. He can't relate to people, let alone kids. And he doesn't have to like them, and he didn't like them. So we get back to Vail, and when Sandler comes along, my dad and I had this thing where we'd meet up for pizza, and we'd go once a week, and I would get to the pizza place, there'd be a Bud Light, and he'd already have ordered whatever it was. I ate the same thing. And he had a 45-minute window, and that was all he could take. So I would show up with Bootsy and Sandler. Sandler was on his feeding tube. And my dad couldn't look at it. He couldn't look at the feeding tube. He couldn't see any of that. Like he didn't like kids. He certainly didn't like my situation with my two kids. So he would tell me to put Sandler under the table. And he, again, unapologetically authentic asshole that he was, he would say, I don't want to see that, put it under the table. And he called him an it. It was my dad. The weird thing was that was my normal. That was not shocking for me. For anybody else who would hear what he had to say, it was terrifying and horrifying. But for me, okay, well, this is our relationship. Our relationship is a 45-minute dinner once a week at the pizza place. He would order Bootsy a chocolate milk, tell her to sit down and drink her chocolate milk, and that was our time. And you know what? I just accepted that that was the time we got with him. Well, when we fled, when we ran away from Colorado, he was supportive, and he was one of the only people I stayed in touch with, and supportive in that he knew enough about what was going on that he was like, just go, kind of. There wasn't a lot of gray with my dad. It was yes, no, and so he happened to be the kind of person I needed to hear, because he wasn't gonna teeter-totter. He was gonna say yes, no, go, whatever. So I think there was a little bit of that, and we finally we end up in California, and I hadn't seen him, I guess, for a couple years. So not the entire time I was in Washington. And then we get to California, and he comes to visit. He surprises me, and he comes to visit. And he pulls up. He's rented this red Mustang, and he pulls up, and I have no idea he's coming to my house. And there he is with this convertible Mustang. I'm like, oh my gosh, Dad, you're here. And he had gotten himself a hotel. It was kind of his thing. He liked to do surprises like that. Like his presence was his surprise. And I'm like, all right. And I'm thinking he is going to be just so uberly proud. Like, yes, we're living in a studio, but we're living in Southern California, and look how well the kids are doing. Sandler's doing great. He's walking and talking by this point. My dad hadn't seen him since he was literally failure to thrive and potentially not going to make it. And I'm thinking he's going to be so proud. And we go for a walk on the boardwalk, and I guess Sandler was maybe in school half days, because I had Sandler with me, and Bootsy was in school, and my dad couldn't look at him, and my dad could not even take a glance. And then he had gotten a hotel, and we went over to his hotel, and Sandler was swimming. And when I say swimming, he had a life jacket on, so he was kind of like floating around in the pool. And my dad just had this look of disgust on his face. And it was a weird feeling, because I thought, oh my God, it doesn't matter what I do. He is never going to accept this situation. Like, to him, my two kids are burdens. And that was maddening. I was kind of angry at that point. And then, I don't know, maybe like a year later, I stupidly had a moment of, I can't take this anymore. I'm freaking out. Like, I just had a little breakdown. And I know better than to ever call my dad if ever I'm having some sort of emotional issue or episode. And I called him, and I said, Dad, I can't do this. I cannot take care of two special needs kids with no income and no car and I don't know what I don't know what to do. And he said, take them to the state building. I said, what are you talking about? Take them to the state. Just give them to the state. And I was like, wow, a lot of faith in the state of California to think they just have buildings set up where you can bring your children that you can't handle. like a firehouse. What do you mean, take them to the state? And so it was after that, I just thought, he's not ever going to get it. He's never going to understand that although he sees this as a burden, this is your a beautiful little family and your dynamic. And we didn't see each other again for a very very long time, but we stayed in touch and we stayed on the phone. I don't think he really could even keep my kids' names straight or know which one he was talking to on the phone, if and when he talked to him on the phone. He just didn't care, and I couldn't make him care. It just was what it was. Well, finally he retired from teaching or being a ski instructor, and he was teaching tennis in the summers, teaching skiing in the winters until he was 80. So when he was, it was right before COVID, I guess, he had retired and moved to Florida. And a year ago, about a year ago in September, I thought, you know what, we're going to go and say my brother had returned back to the States and was living with my dad. And I thought, let's go see my family. You know what I have left. I mean, it's really all I grew up with. I didn't have much family. It was a very small family. I said, let's go see Poppy and your uncle. And I planned this whole trip. We go to Florida. I knew in planning this trip that something could potentially go wrong, that it was my dad and brother. He never knew how things would go when visiting my family, let alone two people I hadn't seen for a decade. So I, but I have plans. So the plan is to go. We're going to take a road trip. I wanted my dad and brother to go to Key West. I wanted to go to the museum that hosted the treasure where my necklace that my dad had gotten me, the most special thing I own. My dad had gotten me this necklace, and I thought he'd be really interested in going to this museum, and also Sandler being really into Chucky. There's the museum that has the original Chucky doll, who is a doll named Robert. So we were going to Key West. It was a road trip, but I had a minivan rented, and I thought, God, what fun! Like the whole family just on a little road trip to Key West. So we get there, and I also had planned, just in case we needed damage control, we were doing Disney World at the end of that trip. Thank God. Thank God. I had learned a thing or two in my past. Well, we get to Florida, and immediately I have sort of PTSD of like, nothing's changed. My dad and brother have the same mannerisms, still treat me the same. Only that's kind of carried forward to Sandler. And I had a hard time watching my kid be treated the way I was treated growing up. I didn't do well with that. Then it came time for this little road trip I had planned to Key West. And my dad being similar to his mom in the way that he was very stubborn. And if he didn't want to do something, he wasn't going to do it. He would not connect a seatbelt. So for 7 hours that I insisted on driving, because his vision and I guess awareness had me a little wary of the drive and navigating the trip with a rented car. I drove and I insisted, and that didn't go over well because in his eyes, women can't drive. And so I drove, and he refused to put that seatbelt on. So for 7 hours, that sucker dinged, ding, 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 and he doesn't hear. So he didn't hear it. Of course, my kids are in the back of a minivan, and they're also hearing impaired, so no one's hearing this. And I'm going fucking insane. And then we get to the Keys, and everything was a big deal. And he didn't agree with anything I had done, and he didn't want to go to a single museum. And I looked at my brother. I go, take him to a bar. Take him. You got to do something. I can't do this. I literally was reliving my life when I took care of Granny, and I thought, oh shit, like this is too much. So my brother took him, we met up at a restaurant, and my dad's good and buzzed up at this point, and the server can just feel my my energy and my pain. And I'm thinking, I can't do that drive with this guy all the way home, like another 7 hours. And so he was adamant about going to a barbecue place. He had gone to college there. He and my mom had met actually in Miami, Florida, and he wanted to go to this a barbecue place. And I, of course, put it on my navigation, like on my GPS, whatever, Wazed it. And he doesn't understand technology, so he doesn't think I have any idea where I'm going. And he said something to me about not knowing where I was going in Miami, and I flipped out. I parked the car. It wasn't in like the nicest part of Miami, and so I couldn't sit in the car and pout, but we just sat there, and I packed the kids up that night. I got everybody home to his and my brother's place, and I said to the kids, we're out of here tomorrow morning. I couldn't drive anymore, or I would have left that night, but I said, I will not do this. And I packed us up, and the exit wasn't good. But I felt kind of empowered, because for the first time, I think I was maybe one of the first people to ever stand up to my dad. And he said, where are you going? I'm not staying here. You're awful. It was seeing that my dad genuinely, as much as I admired him for not caring what people thought, he didn't care about people, and he didn't care about my kids. And that was hard for me. I guess I realized I didn't care so much. I could handle it, but I thought, if you don't care about my kids, then I don't think we have anything to discuss, or I don't think we have a relationship to carry on. We're kind of a package deal here. And so I packed the kids up, and in the morning we grabbed our stuff and we headed out a few days early from that trip. And thank God, again, I had planned on Disney World for the damage control, because the kids were it was a little emotionally draining. And I, again, didn't talk to them for quite some time. And it had literally taken me almost 50 years, 48 to be exact years, to figure out that my dad genuinely doesn't have like the emotions or the capacity or the wheelhouse to love family members. Like, that just doesn't exist. And so it was almost therapeutic, and like understanding, okay, this isn't me. Like, it's that guy. And it was okay. I realized that fortunately I hadn't had my kids around that as a person to look up to and to emulate or try to become. And it just is what it is. And again, kind of like my mom and my time with my mom, fortunately I was able to kind of take that and go, okay, how not to be. And I have the luxury of blaming my poor choices on who I've spent time with, on my parents, because I can say, well, you were the example, but I'm definitely doing my best to show my kids a different way of doing things. And he will always be that strong, stubborn asshole, and I will always love him, but my God, I'll never visit Florida again. I'll never, ever put myself in that situation or be around that. And I think I am very fortunate to have had the gift of a glimpse into what his childhood must have been with Granny, because it just made me understand how he potentially turned out the way he did.
Did that be good?
And today's special edition is a wonderful tradition we have over here on Father's Day. To all of the fathers out there, I turn into Nick for the day. No more Nikki. It's me, Nick, and my two kids, Sandler and Bootsy. What do you have to say for Father's Day?
Happy Father's Day. I hope you have it all of you guys, all the coolest dad out there, have the best Father's Day out there in the whole world. Make it a good one. Happy Father's Day. Bootsy, go ahead.
Happy Father's Day to all the coolest dads out there.
Tune in next week for a podcast all about how much therapy I require all about the time on the couch. Like, follow, share, and subscribe. You can find me on
YouTube,
YouTube,
Spotify,
Apple Podcasts.
and adultchicken.com. Get the .com in there. What happens?
Just adult chicken.
Adult Chicken.
Just a bunch of adult chickens. Okay. Happy Father's Day.
Bye. You.